Welcome back, everybody. It's Roller Coaster. Today I'm counting down the top 20 B&M Inverts in honor of those two coasters that are closing down in 2 days on the 4th of September. It's a pretty sad closure, but I figured I would finally make this list considering it's the last time there'll be 20 in a long time, 20 B&M Inverts. I'm trying to make a very good, solid list that I'll agree with 20 years from now. So instead of ranking the coasters without a very good explanation, I've decided to categorize or rate each coaster based on 4 things. Intensity out of 20, because that's probably the most important thing on an invert, because you're not really going to get a lot of airtime. So I just put intensity. I also got pacing, which is a pretty important thing as well, though all inverts do pretty good in that category usually. You got the elements, which is mainly whip or unique elements like an overbank on Silver Bill or something like that. And that's out of 10 as well. And then you got duration, which is another pretty important thing. If you got a short ride, that's not going to rank as high as another as a much longer invert. So yeah, there you go. So and it's out of 50. So it's not like I'm not ranking the coaster as I would out of any coaster. I'm ranking them as far as B&M inverts go, or as far as just any invert would go. All right. So let's get started. And the first 2 coasters are going to be widely disagreed on, but I think you might understand why I'm putting them so low later, and that is 20 is Patriot at Worlds of Fun. Now, this coaster, it's really known for being a really pretty new B&M invert, and the thing is, new B&M inverts are just generally not as intense, not as whippy and snappy and throw you around as the older ones, the better ones. So why do I think this is the weakest B&M invert? Well, mainly the lack of intensity. There's really no intense elements on this thing besides a pretty small half helix towards the end. The pacing is pretty alright. There's a weird turnaround following the element that doesn't really accomplish anything, and there's an airtime hill that may or may not provide airtime before the corkscrew. I gave it a 2 for elements. The only really whippy element is the corkscrew. A lot of people talk about the 0G roll on this ride being super smooth and cool, but I don't really care if there's a really smooth 0G roll. I really only care about a 0G roll that just throws you through it and whips you around. So yeah, so there you go. That's Patriot. Now the next ride is very, very similar to that, Talon at Dorney Park. I'm sure. I know that there's a lot of fanboy to this ride, and I apologize, but it's true. This ride isn't as great as you all say. That's mainly because it's just like Patriot. I gave it a slightly higher intensity rating because the helix in this ride is a lot longer. That low photogenic part. That helix is pretty good, but the pacing is actually worse. There's a kind of slow above ground section where it just does a forceless turn, so I gave it a 7 there. And it's got the exact same elements, the exact same quality of elements. I guess the 0G roll isn't as smooth, and it's a little bit whippier, but not much better. So, and it's also slightly longer as well, so that's cool. Now, next up is another B&M invert that's caught up in the newness, and that is Oziris at Park Asterix. That's right. So it may be a very, very pretty ride, so similar to Talon and Patriot. It's just not very forceful at all. There's only really one intense non-inverting element, and that is a helix towards the end of the ride. It isn't even that great in the first place. The pacing isn't too great either. There's 1 or 2 sections where the ride just doesn't do anything, mainly towards the end. Forceless turns, that sort of thing. Some inverts just do that kind of weird thing towards the end. Also, I gave it a 1 for elements and whip. I'm mainly worrying about whip, but really the elements, they're just not whippy at all. The 0G rolls are probably the worst on an invert if you're looking for what I'm looking for, and that is a whip, a roll that just throws you through it. So that's where I placed Oziris. Now next up, Phaethon, or Python is actually how you pronounce it apparently, at Gyeongju World, a very, very forgotten B&M invert in South Korea. Now it's pretty similar to Silver Bullet actually, which we'll get to pretty soon. It's got the same elements found on that, except the first half is like Raptor. It's got vertical loop, 0G roll, cobra roll, and by the way, that cobra roll is not even whippy at all. So I give it still a 2 out of 10 for whip. Just that new B&M invert, not very whippy, not very throw you around. So not a huge fan of that. The pacing is pretty good. unlike Raptor, there is no mid-course brake run, so that's a plus. And it's got one intense helix towards the end that looks pretty alright. So there's that. There's Phaethon. 16 is a ride that you probably expected a lot lower, actually. Nemesis Inferno. This is often considered one of the worst B&M inverts, but I've decided to rank it here because, one, the pacing is excellent. Seriously, just never slows down on this ride. The intensity, it's not too great, but I mean, really, it's always doing a somewhat intense element. The whip, the elements aren't excellent, but the corkscrews and 0G roll is a little bit better than the past few, so that's good. But it is a very, very short ride, only about 30 seconds from drop to brakes, so that's not the best thing ever. But still, a very great ride. Nobody really ever talks about it because it's like always, so short, pretty small for B&M invert standards, but still a great ride. So 15 is Silver Bullet. Yep, a lot of people keep saying this is the worst B&M invert, but I'm gonna have to disagree, considering the unique elements on this thing, mainly the overbank after the first loop. That actually looks like a really, really sick element. This is one of the few coasters where whip is ignored, and I, said, oh man, that's a sick overbank. That's totally, totally worthy of increasing the elements out of 10. So that's cool. It's not super intense. The only really intense part of the ride is a pretty solid looking helix towards the end. Actually, at the very end. So, but that's about it. The pacing is also really good. There's no mid-course brake run. Never really slows down. Before the corkscrews, there's a pretty strange forceless turn, but that's not a huge deal. So I only took off 1 point for that little thing. And yeah, that's where Silver Bullet is. Also, there's a pretty big gap between this and Nemesis Inferno. It's like 3.2 above that. So anyway, moving on. Number 14, Great Bear at Hershey Park. This is the first old B&M invert, but it's kind of known that this is one of the weakest older ones, considering it's very short. It's got a very unique layout, but it's not really a good kind of unique layout since it's so short. So I mean, the duration isn't short, but the amount of elements it has, it's only got 4 inversions, no helix. Well, the helix is found before the drop, but that's not even intense. But I give it a 10 out of 20 for intensity, mainly because of that super powerful corkscrew at the end. That thing looks like probably the best corkscrew on an invert ever. It just throws you through it. It looks pretty intense. Looks great. Also, that 0G roll looks excellent on this thing, too. The pacing isn't great. After the corkscrew, the pacing just completely dies down before the brake run, so that kind of sucks. But yeah, it's definitely a great looking ride in a cool location, so that's cool. Now 13, another coaster you guys were expecting to be a lot higher, I'm sure, but nope. Black Mamba at Phantasialand. A pretty compact, intense invert for sure. Just it's newer, so it's bound to be placed around here. It's got a lot of like towards the end, a lot of intense helixy bits that are pretty good. Like it's got perfect pacing. I gave it a 10 there because it's always doing something, always weaving it in and out of things. But like the inversions and the elements just aren't as intense as they could be on like an older invert, for example. The whip isn't great also because it's a newer invert. It's better than like Patriot or Talon though, for sure, because the 0G roll and corkscrews. There's 2 corkscrews and they're both pretty whippy. So I gave it a 7 for that one. So that's Black Mamba. There you go. Here is actually Batman clones. That's right, ahead of Black Mamba just because they're way more intense, way more snappy. Well, not way more snappy. The pacing is pretty good too. Not excellent. The helix after the third loop can generate some pretty solid blackout like intensity over there, but after that helix it does a forceless turn, which made me take off 2 points for pacing, but still pretty good. It's not like super whippy though. It's not as whippy as like Great Bear is, because it's not traveling super quickly through the corkscrews. The 0G roll is about only above average. So, but yeah, it's also a pretty short ride, so it's not going to be as high as like the inverts in the top 5 for sure. But considering it's an older invert, I'm going to rank it this high. Everybody seems to forget, like, oh man, this is actually a really, really great ride, because everybody always says, oh, it's a clone, it sucks, it's everywhere. Yeah, but I can do a pretty good job of ignoring that, and I have ridden one of these. It was actually the worst one, apparently, the ratliest one at Fiesta, Texas, which has been relocated from Japan to Six Flags New Orleans and back to Texas. So anyway, that was a pretty big tangent. Let's go on to 11, which is Hungarian Horntail. That's right, the first of the 2 Dragon Challenge coasters, or Dueling Dragons, which is closing in 2 days, sadly. So it's a pretty intense ride, of course. It's got a pretty decent helix. I don't know, the first element's actually a somewhat forceless turn, which is unique, but not the best first element to start off with. Then it heads into a really, really awesome 0G roll. Is that next? Yeah. 0G roll that looks super, super intense and whippy. The other, well, yeah, then after that 0G roll, sorry. A really awesome Cobra roll. Super whippy, super awesome. Then after that Cobra roll, it kind of dwindles. It kind of does some straight sections because it used to be a dueling coaster, and B&M couldn't really fit an element into every location. So there are a few straight sections, and that made me lower the pacing by 2 points, but it's still pretty quick throughout the whole ride. The corkscrew is pretty whippy as well. Just a pretty solid, old B&M invert. So there you go. Number 10 is Alpengeist. And a lot of people really hate this ride because it's rough, but I actually really like the roughness. I gave it a 10 for whip because it really whips you around. I mean, it might whip you into your restraint, but it certainly is awesome and whippy. So yeah. Now, I've heard some conflicting statements about this ride's intensity. I've heard it's got, really intense vertical loop. I've heard it's a really forceless vertical loop. I don't know what to believe. I gave it a 14 because, one, it's an old B&M invert. The elements has got a great. It's got a nice helix at the end. But the pacing, I'm giving a 6. By the way, I take off 2 points for the mid-course break run, and this thing has a mid-course. And towards the end of the ride, it just kind of meanders to the break run, so I took off 2 points for that as well, because it's not really using all 60 seconds to its advantage. It could have been doing another element during that time, but it didn't, so that's why I took off those 2 points. But yeah, the whip is the main point of this ride. That Cobra roll looks probably like the best Cobra roll ever, honestly. Super intense, snappy Cobra roll. Looks excellent. The 0G roll isn't super whippy, but still a lot of fun, and the corkscrew looks pretty good as well. So there's Alpengeist. Looks like a great B&M invert. Can't wait to ride it one day. I feel like I would like this invert more than most just because of how whippy it is. So this might rank higher, it might rank lower. I'm not too sure about how intense it is, but I know for one thing, very, very whippy, very, very snappy, very awesome. Number 9, Shiny's Fireball at Islands of Adventure. That's right, the other Dragon Challenge coaster, Dueling Dragons, closing in 2 days. How sad! I'm pretty pissed off. I never got to ride these 2 rides because it's pretty much confirmed that they're going to be scrapped. Universal just would not sell these rides. So that's pretty sad. Anyway, thanks for the ride because it's the last time I get to rank them. A very, very unique B&M invert, probably a little bit more unique than Hungarian Horntail, actually. It starts to ride off with a nice Immelman, which is, totally okay. And then a pretty alright airtime hill. I'm not sure how much airtime you get there. I've heard it may or may not give you decent floater, like moderate to low floater. But it's still a unique element, still a cool element. I like to see it. And then you got, after that is a really awesome element, the wraparound Immelman, where it does the Immelman and then right into a helix that wraps around the immersion. Looks like a great, great element. And then after that, you head into the dueling loops, which is great. And then it does kind of the same thing as Hungarian Horntail, where it does the straight sections where it would be setting up for an awesome dueling moment, but it doesn't. It has 2 corkscrews, so I gave it a 9 because it does not have the Cobra roll or the 0G roll that Hungarian Horntail has. So took off a point for whip there, but it's still got 2 great whippy corkscrews, so gotta love it. All right, number 8 is a ride that is kind of underrated in my opinion. We got Flight Deck at California's Great America. Very, very intense ride. It's got 2 awesome helixes that look like some of the best on an invert, actually. Honestly, I wouldn't mind making it 19 out of 20 for intensity, but if I did that, then it would be kind of a crime to the coasters that come after it. Anyway, the pacing is pretty solid. Before the corkscrew pictured here, there's a very forceless turn that takes away the pacing a good bit, but still a pretty solid little ride. Yeah, that's right. Very, very short invert. Only about 35 seconds drop to brakes. Only got to loop, a helix, a roll, a turn, a corkscrew, a helix, and then you're done. So 35-second ride. Still a great ride. The whip, the whip on that 0G roll looks excellent. Probably one of the best 0G rolls on an invert. The corkscrew is just about average though, because you're not going too fast because it's a shorter ride. like shorter height wise. And then another awesome helix that, like, I've heard you can black out on either helix. That's how awesome these helixes are. So I would give it a 19 out of 20. But if I did that, then Banshee would be at number 8 below Flight Deck, a ride half its size. And that would be a bit of a crime. The intensity in this ride is pretty good. I've ridden it. I've ridden it only in the back row, actually. That bit of a mistake considering how rally this ride is, but still a great ride. Pretty intense inversions, actually. They're all great intense. Nice helix as well. The pacing is great too. Doesn't really have any like forceless, boring sections. It's just the elements aren't like super quick and whippy, which is why I'm not going to give it that perfect 10. And the whip, yeah, again, no like really whippy elements. The only really whippy element is the drop, where it like really whips you around that turn, which is a great first drop, by the way. Probably the best or second best on a B&M invert. And I gave it a 7, not because of how whippy it is. I gave it a 7 because of that roll picture, that like across that whole picture. You get some pretty solid hang time there. The only really invert where you get hang time, the only B&M invert where you get some solid hang time. That's a pretty cool element. So yeah, Banshee, very unique ride. Some great elements in there, intense elements. But and I should add that I did not mention the rattle or the vest restraints. I'm not a fan of either of those things, but because I'm rating this like the best that the inverts can run, so I'm just completely ignoring all that. The vests aren't a huge deal to me. I mean, they do kind of dig into you, but it's not. I didn't take any points off for it. I'm just trying to be as fair as I can, because I know a lot of people would disagree with that. So that's where I'm putting Banshee. Next up, we got Raptor or Monster. Both really old, awesome B&M inverts. I've ridden Raptor 10 plus times. Great ride. So again, very intense rides. They both end with a really solid, long sustained, intense helix. So I gave it a nice 18 out of 20 for that. The pacing is pretty alright. It's got a mid-course brake run. And Monster doesn't even have the trims on, but that doesn't matter. All that matters is that you're not doing anything. So the pacing isn't great. It does a few straight sections before the inversion, so I knocked off one more point for that. So the pacing isn't great. But the elements, oh man, I love the whip on this ride. The 0G roll is great. The Cobra roll is just insane. I love that Cobra roll, which is why I love Alpengeist so much. It's also a pretty long ride as well, so really great invert. I love it so much. I ride it as much as I can whenever I go to Cedar Point. It rarely has a line after 6 p.m., so you can marathon it pretty easily. Great ride. All right, number 5 is Afterburn at Carowinds. Another really great old B&M invert. Some great pacing. No mid-course brake on this ride. The only really bad spot with pacing is like there's like this airtime hill that goes over the lift hill in the station. It doesn't really take it. It doesn't really take that at a super quick speed, but it's still very good. And the elements are great in this thing too, dude. Oh man, dude, that's right, dude. The 0G roll is pretty good, pretty above average. Then you got the Batwing. The Batwing is just insane. Very intense inversion. Very whippy. Really whips you into that inversion, and well, in and out of both inversions. Just a great element. Probably the best element on an invert. Well, not on any invert, but on a invert, it would be the Batwing. Great intense whippy element. And the corkscrew, I should mention as well. It's like so whippy that it's almost controversial. It's like, is it good or is it bad? I think it's great. I love a nice whippy corkscrew that just like throws you around. So great invert for sure. And yeah, all right, Montu, Busch Gardens Tampa, number 4. That's right. This is a little bit low, but it certainly is the best invert in the country. It's got the same exact order of elements as Afterburn does. You know, the loop, Immelman's 0G roll. Might I add, the 0G roll is super whippy, probably one of the most whippy on an invert. So I would love that. And then you got the awesome trimmed Batwing on this ride. And the trim doesn't even affect the power of the Batwing. I've heard it's still super intense, super whippy, just awesome. And then you head up into that mid course, which really robs the ride of a lot of its speed, actually. And that means that the vertical loop, or no, the section after the vertical loop is like this really poorly paced section. So I took off 1 or 1.5 points off right there because the second half of this ride just really isn't paced super well. And then it heads into a really nice corkscrew, pretty whippy, pretty awesome. So yeah, great ride. The longest inverted coaster as far as time goes, duration, tied with the next coaster, Pyrenees, at Parc España. An invert very few people have heard of, and that should not be true considering this ride just looks insane. It's basically a super Batman, people like to call it, because it's got the vertical loop, zero roll, another vertical loop, and after that it becomes super Batman because you got a Cobra roll. So awesome whippy elements, awesome whippy zero roll, Cobra roll, and the corkscrew. Only got 6 inversions, not that second corkscrew, but still great elements. Pretty intense ride. It's got a helix that goes through a vertical loop into the mid-course brake run, which made me take off 2 points for pacing. And the next point I took off for pacing comes after the corkscrew, where the ride does a forceless turn into actually an airtime hill, which isn't the best element. You might not even get airtime there, so that kind of stinks. But yeah, still a great looking invert. Probably top 4 no matter what. Montu could be better than that. I'm not too positive about the top 4 inverts, but this is where I'm putting him for now. Number 2, we got Katun at Mirabilandia. That's right, it's not number 1. Sorry. Super intense invert for sure. You got probably what might be the best drop on an invert. I'm not too sure how much airtime that you get in the back row, but it looks like you might get some because of how steep it is and how fast you're already traveling when you enter the drop. But yeah, intensity, I give it an 18.5 just because it's got 2 helixes. Pyrenees only has 1. It has an intense turn into the brake run, but whatever, I should have mentioned that earlier. But Katun has 2 perfect helixes. It's got that vertical loop into the zero roll, and then an intense turn into the super whippy Cobra roll. So again, of course, all these are getting a 10 for whip, which is just, kind of a given because they're all old B&M inverts. The pacing is pretty good besides the mid-course. It's basically the best pacing for an invert with a mid-course brake run. So I gave it an 8 right there. Intensity, again, 2 helixes, already said that. Yeah, definitely just like the perfect B&M invert. Or is it? I don't think so, because Nemesis is the best B&M invert in my opinion because of that first helix. That thing's totally hauls, probably the best helix on any B&M ever created, ever. Again, like all the others, super intense, whippy elements, that zero roll and the corkscrews just look great. The pacing isn't perfect. There is like 1 forceless turn in there, and the loop, it kind of slows down at the top, but that's like minor. I only took off 1 point for that. It's also a shorter B&M, so it's tough for me to, it's tough for it to get to number 1 on these lists. But because I gave it a 20 for intensity, that just, like, come on. It's got 2 intense non-inverting elements, the rest is just awesome. Also, it's got the terrain interaction, which is totally awesome as well. And I don't really mention that too much, but like I didn't even mention it for Black Mamba. Like some people prefer the whole experience and the theming. I'm here for the ride. I'm here for the intensity. I like that raw whip intensity awesomeness in my B&M invert. Anyway, that's gonna be the video for today, guys. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you guys later.